The rendezvous sounded like a war you wanted to lose yourself in. Rifles cracked in the cottonwoods where boys who had never seen a line of regulars fired at marks on a stripped sapling. A brass trade bell clanged somewhere near the American fur tents. Shoshone children chased each other between draped poles, their laughter braided with the bawling of pack mules and the guttural curses of Canadian boatmen arguing in French. Smoke from a dozen green wood fires hung low over the meadow, turning the far line of willows into a gray smudge. The whole flat along the Green River stank of tanned buffalo hides, horse sweat, cheap Taos whiskey, and men who had outlived the habit of bathing. A barrel of black powder burst with a sharp report as some joker snapped a coal where he should not have, and the shout that rose after it was part fear, part delight. Above it all, the big mountain of music and noise rolled on, a fiddle scraping out a reel, a drum in the Shoshone camp pounding like a second. Heartbeat for the whole valley, the singsong of Spanish from the New Mexican traders haggling over beaver plews. Elias Carter watched it from the shade of his own wagon-tongue lean-to, as if he were studying a river he did not intend to cross. He sat cross-legged on a rolled buffalo robe, back against a cottonwood trunk, hat pushed low over his eyes. The hat had once been black, now it was the color of smoke and sweat. A pale scar ran from his left temple, through the eyebrow, and disappeared into his beard like a creek losing itself in timber. His right hand rested on the stock of a long rifle laid across his knees, fingers moving just enough to show he was awake and listening. Men passed him by without much more than a glance, the way you walk past a rock that has always been there. Those who knew his name never said it loud. "Old Elias is still here," a young trapper murmured to his friend as they staggered past with a keg between them. "Garden that fool's map like it," was the holy book. "Map to nowhere," the other snorted. "Them Spaniards never dug that deep this far north. Padre stories." Whiskey talk. They laughed and veered off toward the gambling circle to lose their winter's work in the turn of a greasy deck of cards. Elias's mouth twitched, but it was not quite a smile. He was known, when he was known at all, for two things. One was the scrap of smoked hide he kept folded in a little parfleche bag beneath his shirt, over his ribs. That was the fool's map, the one that had men shaking their heads in tents from Fort Union clear down to Taos. It was said to show the way to a lost Spanish mine somewhere in the high country beyond the Green, a place where the earth bled yellow in seams as thick as a man's wrist. Men swore the markings on it were old pre-sign, the kind you saw carved on rock near the trails Dominguez and Escalante had taken when they wandered through this country with their mules and their Latin prayers. The other thing was stranger, because it was real and you could see it with your own eyes. Elias could raise a cabin in half the time it took any three men working the ordinary way. He did it with a contraption he built out of laurel wood and iron nails, no bigger than a man's forearm, a three-sided frame with notches cut along its edges. He called it his stick, with the kind of plainness you use for something that ought not draw too much attention. With that stick and a sharp axe, he could notch a run of logs so they stacked and locked like a child's toys, each shoulder and saddle fitting the next, as if they had grown that way. The men who had doubled up under one of his quick cabins in a blizzard did not mock that trick, but they mocked the map. Two boys with whiskers barely started stood a little ways off now, in the patchwork shade of a pole rack hung with drying pelts. One had a new capote with braid on the sleeves, the other a hatband made of polished brass tacks. They were looking at Elias the way pups look at an old fighting dog tied up. "You see it?" the one with the capote whispered. "You ever laid eyes on that map?" "I seen him take it out once," the other said. "Up on the Sweetwater. Thought we was all asleep. Just a scrap o' hide with scratches on it. Could have been anything. Could have been nothing." "Could have been gold," the first one said, eyes sliding toward Elias. "Real Spanish. Could have been another graveyard. Ask some o' them old hands." The second jerked his chin toward a circle of older men, gray beards, scarred noses, men who had counted seasons in winters rather than in years. They seen too many damn fools ride out after Padre treasure and never come back. The older trappers sat around a low fire near one of the company tents, mugs in hand, talking low. The names they spoke did not mean much to the boys, just ghosts, men who had ridden west with Ashley, who had followed Jedediah. Smith through country even the tribes walked around. Their laughter, when it came, was dry and not as loud as the young men's. "Spanish gold," one of them said, and spit into the dust. "I seen one of them supposed mines down on the San Juan took more lives than it ever paid out. Padres left their dead right in the shaft. You want my word, the best thing them priests ever done was lose their way and go back south." "Then what's Carter doin'?" another asked. "He been carryin' that map how long now?" "Long as I known him," the first answered. "Maybe he just likes havin' something men will talk about when he passes. Better than they sayin' nothin' at all." Elias heard all that. He did not turn his head. He watched the river instead. Green River slid past the meadow in a slow, heavy run, the water brown-green with the melt of far-off snows. Shoshone horses drank at its edge. Two boys in shirts and nothing else threw themselves shrieking into the shallows, came up flailing at the cold, then did it again. Beyond them, the western horizon was a jagged blue wall. Elias's eyes rested there a moment, on the high country where the ridges lay like sleeping buffalo. He had seen a different river once, with different men on its banks. In his mind, the noise of rendezvous thinned, and another sound crept in. The wet, rattling breath of a man trying to hold on to a world that was already letting go. It had been late fall, up in the broken country where the Ute hunted elk before the snows. Elias had been younger then, though he had already lived long enough for scars. He and two companions had gone out ahead of a brigade, following a line of fresh smoke that should not have been there. They found what was left of a Ute party in a cut of timber below a cliff, bodies twisted among the rocks, snow-pink where it had melted and refrozen over their wounds. There had been one man still breathing. He was old, his hair gone mostly white, his face turned into a map of creases by time and wind. An iron-headed arrow stood out from his chest like a stake. The shaft had snapped against a rock when he fell. Every breath he took bubbled faintly at the corners of his mouth. He clutched a quiver to his side with both hands, as if the arrows inside could still do him some good. Elias had knelt beside him, not knowing what he meant to do. Mercy-killing, maybe. Or just listening, because it was a lonely way to die, and he was not yet hardened enough to ride past a man like that and let the crows have the last word. The old Ute's eyes had found his. Dark, bright, fevered. He spoke a flood of words Elias did not understand, then saw that the white man did not follow. With a grunt that sounded more like anger than pain, he dragged one hand from the quiver and slapped it against Elias's chest, not the chest itself. The spot where a man might wear something important, close to the heart. Then he pulled at the quiver's tie with fingers, gone clumsy. An arrow spilled out, then another. Between them, wrapped in rawhide, was a little strip of smoked deer hide, folded over twice. The old man shoved it at Elias, hard enough to hurt. His eyes burned with a kind of fury. "Padre," he wheezed in broken Spanish. "Padre Oro, Norte, Sierra Roja, Sangre." He coughed, spat bright blood on the snow. "Tierra, Canta, Padre Gold, North, Red Mountains, blood, the earth sings." That much Elias understood. He had picked up enough Spanish drifting through Taos and among New Mexican trappers. He also understood the look in the old man's eyes when he clutched Elias's wrist and shook it, as if trying to nail that scrap of hide into him. It was not greed, it was something closer to warning. He opened the rawhide wrap there in the snow. Inside was the map, or what men at the rendezvous would later call a map, a set of lines and crosses, little hills drawn like waves, a river twisting through them, a jagged cluster of marks, near the top with a tiny cross above it, as if a priest had put his blessing or his curse on that spot. By the time he looked up from it, the old Ute had gone still. Back in the present, a gust of river breeze pushed camp smoke toward Elias's lean-to. The shout of a drunken song rose from the gamblers' circle and broke apart in laughter. A Shoshone woman carrying an armload of trade cloth walked past him, her eyes flicking to his face and away again, as if she could see the dead man's hand still clutching at his wrist. "Hey, Carter." A shadow fell across him. He looked up to see a young fellow with a red beard and eyes already glazed with whiskey. The boy rocked on his heels, grinning. "That priest's treasure o' yours," the boy said, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "You think it is up there?" He jerked his chin at the blue wall of mountains. "Or is it hid under your blanket so no one steals your dreams?" A couple of nearby trappers snickered. Elias studied the boy's face a long breath, seeing not him but a dozen others before him, men who had asked the same thing with the same smile, full of that sweet poison the mountains like to feed the young. Then he let his gaze drift back to the ridges. "Some things ain't lost," he said quietly. "They are just waitin' for the right fool to find 'em." That got another laugh, but it was thinner this time. The boy swaggered off, satisfied he had poked the bear. Elias reached up under his shirt, feeling for the familiar shape of the little parfleche bag against his ribs. The hide inside was warm with his body heat. The marks on it did not care who believed in them. Lines cut by a priest's knife or a hunter's bone-awl did not know the difference between myth and truth. They only knew the hand that would follow them. Out beyond the roar of rendezvous, the mountains waited, blue and silent, like a row of old judges. Elias Carter closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the river and the distant drum. He had carried the map a long time, long enough that he could not say any more whether it was leading him on or whether he was the one dragging it, like a ghost he could not put down. Madman or messenger, fool or the only man in camp who had looked into a dying warrior's eyes and taken the burden he tried to give back to the land. The rendezvous laughed and traded and fired its rifles around him. The question hung between him and the high country like smoke. Was the map a myth that had already killed its share of men, or a truth sharper than any blade a line cut into the very bones of the mountains, waiting for one stubborn, scarred trapper to trace it all the way to whatever lay at the end? The first hint that the season meant to turn mean came on a morning when the wind shifted, carrying the cold breath of the high peaks down into Willow Draw. The grass there grew tall in summer, waving in long ripples like the hide of some great sleeping animal. Beavers had built 3 dams in the bend of the creek, their roofs slick with dew, and the willows stood in thick clusters, silver-backed and trembling. The place should have been peaceful. But no place stayed peaceful long in the mountains. Elias Carter smelled danger before he heard it. He was kneeling by the creek, resetting a trap that some clever old beaver had sprung in the night without leaving a hair behind. His hands were wet and cold. When the breeze changed, he froze. It wasn't the musk of beaver, nor the wet earth smell of willow. It was heavier, greasy. A scent like a horse hide cured too long in the sun, mixed with the sour reek of berries. Bear. A heartbeat, later came the sound low, rumbling, like boulders grinding deep underground. Then a sudden shout from farther up the draw. "Help, Elias, help!" The voice was young, too young. Elias dropped the trap and ran. He crashed through willow branches, the thin shoots whipping at his coat. Ahead, in a patch of livelday, crushed reeds, Caleb Rudd flailed on his back, his rifle a useless stick beneath him. Standing over him looming, shoulders heaving, was a grizzly boar big enough to carry off a mule. Its coat was dark with mud, its muzzle dripping with creek water. One swipe of its paw had opened Caleb's shirt and laid his chest open in 3 long red slashes. The bear huffed once, fog spilling from its nostrils. Elias didn't shout. Shouting only stirred frenzy. Instead, he dropped to one knee, scooped up a handful of dry pine pitch from the ground. He kept lumps of it in his pocket for fire starting and struck flint to steel. Once, twice. A spark caught, eating into the pitch. He tossed the burning clump toward the bear. To a grizzly, fire meant only one thing: pain from stories older than men. The bear reared back, confused, snorting as the pitch sputtered and popped near its front paws. Elias didn't wait for the animal to decide fear or fury. He grabbed 2 river stones the size of apples from the mud, slapped them together 1, 2, until a sharp, ringing crack echoed across the draw. The sound echoed like a rival boar's jaw pop, a challenge noise. Grizzlies hated challengers even more than fire. The beast swung around, ears flattening, torn between signals. Fire, challenge, pain, rivals, Caleb's ragged breathing. For one moment, the world hung on the balance of a confused mind in a massive body. Elias stepped sideways, slow, deliberate, making himself bigger, spreading his coat. He kept slapping the stones. The sharp cracks bounced off the willows like angry spirits. At last the bear chose. It wheeled away from Caleb Thunder on 4 legs and charged toward the burning pitch, then past it, barreling toward the thicker timber where shadows offered safety. A crash of brush, a shower of pine needles, and the draw went quiet again. Elias dropped the stones. His hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. Caleb lay panting in the reeds, pale as milk, staring up at the sky. "I thought," he gasped. "I thought that was it." "Would have been," Elias grunted, tearing the sleeve off his own shirt and pressing it against the boy's bleeding chest. "If the bear had had a mind only for blood, lucky for you, he had a mind full of other things." Caleb winced, trying to sit up. Elias pushed him down again with a firm hand. What did you do?" the younger man asked. "That trick?" "Just noise and fire," Elias said. "Everything in the mountains loves one and hates the other. Tricks in knowing which one to offer." Caleb swallowed. "I've seen men fire muskets at bears and not scare 'em off half as fast." "That's because muskets talk too slow and too loud," Elias said. "Stones talk fast and sharp. Bears understand that tongue better." He bound the wounds tight, using strips of cloth and a dab of spruce gum. It would hold until they got back to camp. Caleb watched him work, the fear slowly draining from his face, replaced by something else. Respect. After a long silence, the boy said, "They say you got more tricks, cabin tricks." Elias didn't look up. "They say a lot," Caleb persisted, voice faint but steady. "Is it true? You can build a cabin in half the time?" Elias tied the last knot and sat back on his heels. His eyes studied Caleb the way he studied weather, looking for signs of change. "Depends," he said softly. "On the men, on the logs, on the land. A man builds fast if he knows how to measure with his eyes instead of his hands." "That stick of yours," Caleb pressed. "The little frame, I seen you use it once. Never understood it." Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the device. A 3-sided wooden frame, edges notched like a surveyor's tool, worn smooth from years of use. "This here is the reason I still got all my fingers," he said. "And why some men freeze slow instead o' fast." Caleb touched it reverently, as if it were a relic. "Spanish," Elias added, "or part Spanish anyhow. Learned the root of it down in Taos from a carpenter who knew things them padres built and forgot. Notch a log right, and it'll settle straight for 20 winters. Notch it wrong, and you bury friends come the first big snow." Caleb absorbed that in silence. Then, quieter still, "And the map? Is that Spanish too?" A long wind moved through the willows, whispering like something ancient. Elias slipped the triangulation stick back into his coat. "One thing at a time, boy," he said. "First you learn how to stand up to the mountains. After that, maybe you learn how to follow what they hide." He lifted Caleb carefully, supporting him with an arm under his shoulders. Behind them, the grizzlies' tracks dug deep into the wet earth, huge, undeniable, proof of how narrow their escape had been. Ahead of them lay the creek, the traps, and the long walk back to camp. But somewhere beyond all that, beyond the ridges, beyond the noise of rendezvous, beyond the doubt lodged in every man's mouth, waited the thing Caleb had dared to ask about, the map. The one that might be myth, or might be the reason Elias Carter's scars all pointed toward the same horizon. Winter came early that year, riding down from the Wind Rivers like a host of white ghosts. By the first week of October, the Sweetwater Valley lay under a thin rind of frost that never fully melted, even at midday. Creeks formed crusts at their edges. Elk moved lower. The nights grew sharp enough to slice through a man's coat. Elias Carter knew what that meant before the others did. "Winter quarters," he said, spitting a thin line of tobacco juice into the snow. "If we do not build by tomorrow, we will be digging our way out come mornin'." Caleb Rudd stood beside him, arm still bound from the grisly swipe, face pale but determined. Beside them were old Baptiste, half French, half Crow, and all opinion, and 2 Delaware scouts hired out of Fort Laramie. Behind them, warming their hands over a smoky fire, were two more men. A young Kit Carson, years before his name would echo from Taos to California, and a broad-shouldered Missourian named Luke Hardy. The Sweetwater curled behind them in slow gray loops. Willows rattled in the wind like bones. Snowflakes drifted sideways, not falling so much as searching for a place to land. Elias studied the meadow. "Cut the lodgepole first," he said. "Straight ones, 12 to 15 feet, clean as you can." Baptiste snorted. "We cut 100 logs and work 3 days. Snow bury us before roof go on." Elias's eyes flicked toward him. "We are not buildin' the long way." Caleb stepped forward, interest sparking. "You mean the trick? The fast way?" Baptiste groaned, muttering something in French about crazy old men and their magic sticks. But Elias only nodded, pulling the triangulation frame from his coat. The wind had polished its surface over the years until it gleamed like bone. "Stack your axes and listen," Elias said. The men gathered around, stamping cold feet. He held up the triangular frame, just wood, simple and unremarkable to the untrained eye. "This little thing saves us days," Elias said, "maybe lives. The notches here," he tapped the marks with a gloved finger, "are the same angles the old Spanish miners used down in New Mexico. Not for cabins, no, for supports in tunnels. They needed beams to hold fast even when the earth pressed in and tried to kill 'em." Carson leaned in. "You saying this is mine work?" "Partly," Elias said. "Part from a carpenter in Taos. Part from a priest-signed map you fellas won't stop whisperin' about. Part from my own head after enough winters tryin' to build with hands that couldn't feel a damn thing." The Delaware scouts exchanged a look. They respected practical knowledge more than fancy stories. Elias crouched beside a clean lodgepole and placed the frame against the log. The men watched his hands closely. "See here," he said, "the frame gives the same angle every time. That is the secret. Not the tool, the sameness. You make your cabin's corners cut the same, every log, no guesswork. No sittin' there lookin' at a crooked notch and wonderin' why your wall leans like a drunk." He drew his axe, and with 3 sharp strokes he shaved a perfect shoulder notch. Clean, symmetrical. The kind a man would usually spend 20 minutes getting right. "Like that," Elias said. "Easy, repeatable." Carson whistled under his breath. "You could build a fort with that. You could build a coffin if you use it wrong," Elias answered. Then he stood, brushed snow from his knees, and said simply, "Now we work." Carson and Luke cut lodgepole pines. The Delaware men dragged them with rawhide tugs across the snowy ground. Caleb, still bandaged but eager, helped hold them steady. While Elias measured, marked, and notched, with the sure hands of a man shaping destiny rather than timber, the sound of axes rang through the frozen air. Chips flew. Pine sap scented the valley. By midday, with snow creeping over the valley floor in small drifts, they had enough logs for the 4 walls. Elias walked the perimeter of the chosen spot, eyeing the wind direction, calculating the drift patterns, making judgment calls born from decades of watching cabins fail. "Door there," he said. "Facing south, roof leanin' east, prevailing winds blow west to east in this cut." Caleb watched, absorbing every detail. "How'd you learn all this, Elias?" Elias did not look up. "Same way you learn where a bear sleeps," he said. "Winter teaches, if you live long enough." Where another brigade would have taken 3 days to get this far, Elias had them laying the 7th log before sundown. Baptiste, once a skeptic, now nodded with grudging admiration. "Not bad," he said, "for old man magic." "That stick ain't magic," Carson muttered. "It is witchcraft, if you ask me." Even the Delaware men permitted themselves half smiles. Caleb, sweating despite the cold, leaned against a log. "Elias, this is near twice as fast as I ever seen." "Half," Elias corrected. "Half the time, if the timber is straight and the land is right." Snow thickened, swirling in little storms that danced along the meadow. The wind picked up. Their breath billowed white. "Get the roofing beams," Elias said. "We will sleep under shelter tonight." "You think we can finish?" Hardy asked. Elias gave him a flat, steady look. "We ain't choosin'. Winter already chose. The last beams were pegged, the bark scraped, the gaps packed with wet clay that would freeze like stone come morning. Inside, Someone sparked a small fire. Smoke spiraled up into the roofline and finally out the rough chimney hole. Elias had cut. Warmth filled the space. Not comfort, just survival. But that was enough. The men sat on rolled blankets, steam rising from their damp coats. Carson broke the silence. "That stick of yours," he said quietly. "That is Spanish work, ain't it?" Elias looked into the fire. The flames lit the old scar through his eyebrow, making it look fresh again. "Some of it," he said. "Spanish hands, Ute memory, Taos timber, little bit of luck, little bit of the mountains." "And the map?" Caleb asked. Elias did not answer. The wind outside moaned across the sweet water like something lonely and lost. The fire crackled, snow hissed against the roof. After a long time Elias spoke not to any one man, but to the dark corners of the cabin. "Some things a man builds with his hands," he said. "And some things build him." No one asked again about the map. But every man in that cabin felt it hanging over Elias like frost on a dead branch waiting for the moment it would finally matter. The storm broke 2 days later. By then the cabin smelled of smoke, damp wool, and men who had worked too hard in coats too thin. Outside, the sweet water lay stiff under a frozen crust, and the drifts piled against the north wall like white shoulders trying to push their way inside. But winter, fierce as it had arrived, seemed suddenly to lose its voice. The wind fell. The sky cleared to a hard, brittle blue. The world made that strange, ringing silence it only makes when the cold is deep enough to snap trees. Elias Carter opened the door at dawn and stared toward the distant ridges. "It is time," he said. Caleb Rudd straightened. Time for what? Elias didn't answer right away. He stepped out into the snow, letting the light fall across his weathered face. It traced the long scar through his brow. His breath came out like small puffs of smoke. "The storm kept us penned," he said, "but the mountains give windows. When they do, you move." Carson kicked snow off his moccasins. "Move where, Elias? We've got beaver sets a half day east yet." Elias looked at him, steady and slow. "Not east," he said. "South." The words hung in the air. Even Baptiste paused in his work, hands going still inside his mittens. "You mean the map?" Caleb breathed. Elias didn't correct him. The poles of the cabin still steamed from the heat of last night's fire as they loaded their packs. The Delaware scouts were uneasy. They had signed on to trap, not chase after the whispered madness of white men. Yet something in Elias's quiet certainty held them. It was not bravado, not greed. It was a pull like a river current older than logic. They rode single file across the crusted plain, their ponies' hooves crunching loudly. The sweet water wound behind them in pale loops, a silver ribbon half hidden under ice. Ahead rose a vast stretch of country that looked empty even to trappers' eyes, the red desert. Elias had not spoken much since breaking camp. He kept one hand inside his coat where the parfleche bag rested against his ribs. Caleb watched him often, curious and cautious in equal measure. Finally, when the land opened wide and the wind died to a faint whistle, the younger man spoke. "Elias," he said softly, nudging his pony closer. "If you mean to follow that map, we ought to know what we are riding toward." Elias didn't slow. "You seen the lines," he answered. "River, hills, crosses, old priest sign. That is enough," Carson snorted behind them. "Enough to get us killed in a storm or lost in a maze of canyons." Elias stopped his horse, turned. "The only death in these mountains is the kind you walk toward blind," he said. "We ain't blind." Then he reached inside his coat. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He withdrew the parfleche, opened it, unfolded the smoked hide, careful as a man handling a rattlesnake. The others gathered around. The map was small, no bigger than a man's hand, but every mark stood sharp against the old hide. A river drawn in wavering lines, hills marked with little humps, a jagged cluster of symbols near the top like teeth or mountains or both. Beside them a tiny cross. "Spanish priests used crosses for churches," Carson murmured. "Not mines. These ones weren't making churches," Elias said. Caleb squinted. "What's that there?" His finger hovered over a mark shaped like a pillar, with another beside it. Two blunt forms like twin mesas. Double buttes, Elias said. I seen 'em once, years back, huntin' elk with a Shoshone band. They sit west of the Red Desert. Any man wantin' north-south passage sees them clear as a signpost. You sure? Carson asked. Elias folded the hide again. Been sure for near 10 years, he said. The Red Desert spread before them like an ocean of rust. Wind-carved buttes rose from the plains in lonely shapes, towers, walls, broken cathedrals of stone. Sagebrush rattled like dry bones. The land had no trails, only faint game paths winding between dunes of red sand. The further they rode, the quieter the world became. It was Baptiste who first spotted the stone cairn. A pile of rocks stood on a small rise overlooking a dry wash, each stone placed with the unnatural balance of human hands. Snow coated the tops, but the shape remained unmistakably stiff and deliberate. The Delaware scouts approached first, circling it. Not Ute, one murmured. Not Shoshone either. Elias nudged his horse forward. Near the base of the cairn, half hidden by snow, was a symbol cut into one of the stones, a vertical slash crossed by two short lines. A cross. Spanish work. Caleb's breath fogged the air. This is it, ain't it? One of the markers, Elias said. One of many. Carson exchanged a wary look with Hardy. Spanish miners got farther north than folks think. They always did, Elias answered. Only question is why they left. He brushed the snow from the carved stone with the back of his glove. The mark was old, so old the grooves had softened with weather, but the meaning was clear. Padre Oro, Elias whispered. Caleb swallowed. Gold. Baptiste spat in the snow. Gold bring death, always. Elias didn't deny it. He only turned his horse south again. As the men rode on, the Delaware scouts paused, scanning the horizon. One pointed to the crest of a distant hill. Tracks, not animal. Too straight, too deep. Horse tracks, fresh. Someone follow, the scout said. Carson cursed softly. Caleb looked at Elias, who said nothing. The Sweetwater cabin was disappearing behind them. The Spanish cross lay before them. And now, men in their shadow. Bad ones, by the look of the trail. Elias tightened the reins. The map, the mountains, the mine, the truth, they were all waiting, and now the race had begun. Keep ridin', Elias said. We're close to the next sign. But the wind seemed to whisper something colder across the desert. Not just close, not alone. By the third day south of the Red Desert cairn, the country grew stranger. The land folded into itself, canyons hidden inside canyons, cliffs stacked like old bookshelves, mesas rising in sheer, burnt-red walls that glowed at sunrise like embers in a dying fire. The air sharpened. Ravens circled high above, drifting on thin blue thermals. Even the Delaware scouts grew quiet, as if they sensed that something old watched them from the stone. Elias Carter rode point, eyes fixed on the land with the patience of a man, reading scripture written in dirt and wind. Caleb stayed close behind, studying every motion, every pause. Tracks still holdin' south, Carson muttered, riding up alongside. 4 men, maybe 5, movin' steady. Same ones we seen yesterday. They know we know, Hardy added. They ain't hurryin' none. No reason to hurry, Elias said. They figurin' we'll do the hard work. Caleb stiffened in the saddle. You think they're after the mine, too? Elias didn't look back. They ain't out here for the view. The canyon they entered was tall enough to make a man whisper without realizing. Sunlight fell in narrow bands between the walls, leaving most of the passage in cold blue shade. The stone glimmered as if dusted with gold flecks, not metal, but mica sparkling like shattered glass. The Delaware scouts halted abruptly. One pointed to the stone wall. At first, Caleb saw nothing. Then he saw everything. A symbol, carved knee-high where the canyon bent hard to the left, a cross again but different. Spanish priests favored symmetrical crosses, even arms, clean geometry. This one was tilted slightly, as if the carver had used a trembling hand. Beneath it was a faint crescent shape, like the new moon. Elias knelt and brushed frost from the grooves. This is it, he said quietly. A, direction mark. The crescent means west. Cross points the way. Carson frowned. You sure that ain't just a weather-worn scrape?" Elias scraped a bit deeper with his knife tip. The stone gave way easily, revealing the deliberate lines beneath. "Ain't much weather-worn about it," he murmured. "Someone put time into this." "And purpose." Baptiste crossed himself a rare gesture, half French memory, half dread. "Padre Trail," he muttered. "I seen such things on the San Juan. Always lead to trouble." They smelled it before they saw it. Iron, cold, something metallic carried on the wind. Caleb's heartbeat tightened. He guided his horse around a boulder and halted in his tracks. At the far end of the basin, half hidden behind a fall of boulders and brush, yawned a black mouth in the stone. Not natural. Cut. Squared at the edges. An adit, a Spanish-style mine entrance. Snow had drifted half across it. A rotting timber braced the top, cracked down the center. Beside the mouth lay the remnants of old mule rings, iron loops hammered into the rock. Rusted, pitted, but unmistakably forged. Carson whispered a low oath. The Delaware scouts exchanged a look of unease. Caleb swung off his horse as if drawn by gravity itself. "It's real," he murmured. "God above, it's real." Elias dismounted last, slow and steady, as if afraid he'd wake the ghosts who built the place. "Help me clear this," he said. Together they dragged aside brush and fallen stone until the entrance gaped wide like a wound in the cliff face. The cold air that breathed out carried the unmistakable scent of old fires, lantern soot, trapped for decades. Caleb held up his torch. Elias steadied it. They stepped inside. The walls bore pick marks, neat rows cut by square-headed picks, the kind Spanish miners used in the early days before steel imports were common. A timber support ran along the right wall, cracked but still holding. A broken rosary bead lay in the dust, near the entrance, smooth, brown, worn. Carson knelt, picking it up with 2 fingers. "Priest been here," he said. "Miners too," Elias answered softly. "Padres blessed mines same as missions, superstition or protection. Hard to tell where one ended and the other began." Farther in, they found a lantern hook hammered into the wall. Then, deeper still, a split rail crate with Spanish lettering, scorched by time, Mula 4, Oro Carga. Mula 4 gold load. Caleb's breath hitched. "They found the vein," he whispered. "Maybe," Elias said, "or maybe they thought they had." Bootsteps. Hard ones. Elias turned, eyes narrowing. He motioned them to douse the torch. Darkness swallowed them. The cold walls seemed to tighten. Voices drifted faintly into the adit. "They went in here. Told you Carter had the map. Grab whatever gold they missed." Caleb's pulse hammered. Carson's hand drifted toward his knife. Baptiste muttered something in Crow, under his breath. Elias remained utterly still. One set of footsteps approached the entrance. Crunching snow. A silhouette blocked the light. A rough voice Missouri drawl spoke softly. "They found it all right," another answered. "Then we take it." Caleb froze. A third voice added, "Kill 'em if you have to." Spanish gold's worth the trouble. Elias leaned close and whispered, "Let them pass deeper. Dark's our friend. They'll lose their eyes before we lose ours." Carson's breath fogged in silent agreement. Shadows stretched across the walls as the men lit a dim lantern. They stepped deeper into the adit, boots scraping on old dust. Elias raised 3 fingers. Caleb and Carson tensed. When the lantern moved past them and the men's backs turned, Elias closed his hand into a fist. Now they struck like winter thunder. Carson seized the lantern-bearer. Caleb slammed a shoulder into the second man. Baptiste's knife flashed in the dark and sent a third, sprawling. The fight was fast, messy, brutal. The confined space turned every noise into a roar. One man fled screaming toward the entrance. Another collapsed, clutching his ribs. The lantern shattered, plunging the mine into blackness. When silence finally returned, only the sound of labored breathing remained. Elias leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "No more hiding," he said quietly. "There are more mines. This is only the first." Caleb swallowed hard. "How many?" Elias glanced toward the dark passage leading deeper into the mountain. "Enough," he said, "that the Padres marked more than one on that hide. And enough that the men hunting us Won't stop at just this one. Outside, the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, turning the stone red as spilled blood. The canyon of fallen suns had shown them the truth. The Spanish mine was real. But so were the men willing to kill for it. Snow came again that night, thick, wind-driven, and bitter. It swallowed the canyon floor, softened the boulders, and laid a muffling hush over the world. The rivals, battered and scattered by the fight inside the Adit, had fled into the dusk, leaving only boot tracks and a smudge of blood on the snow. The cold would erase their trail by morning. Elias Carter crouched beside their fire, feeding it flakes of pine while the others wrapped blankets tighter around their shoulders. The flames snapped and hissed. Caleb sat closest to him, face drawn and pale. Baptiste muttered Old Crow prayers. The Delaware scouts kept watch beyond the fire's glow, shadows among shadows. Carson nudged a burning stick deeper into the coals. "They'll be comin' back," he said. "Men like that don't quit." "No," Elias agreed quietly. "They don't." Caleb leaned forward. "But we saw what they wanted. That mine, the adit, the Spanish signs. Elias, there are more, ain't there?" Elias stared into the fire, jaw working once, twice. Then he reached into his coat. From the parfleche bag, he withdrew the map carefully, reverently, as if the hide itself carried the weight of the dead Utes' last breath. Snow hissed on the fire as Elias unfolded it, laying the smoked hide across his knees. "Padre mines weren't one shaft," he said. "They were a chain, mark of their ways. They prospected a vein, then moved upslope or southward when the earth shifted or the ore thinned." His finger traced the tiny marks near the top. This is the mother shaft, the big dig." Carson whistled under his breath. "How far?" Elias tapped the uppermost mark. "High country," he said. "Uinta flank, snow country," Hardy groaned. "We'll freeze our teeth off up there." "Better teeth than time," Elias answered. "Storm's breakin'. We move at sunrise." The land rose in great sweeping shoulders. Ponderosa pines gave way to Douglas firs, then to sparse, wind-twisted spruces clinging to gray stone. The air thinned. Their breath steamed. Snow deepened past the ponies' fetlocks, then to their knees. Caleb shivered beneath his coat. The wound from the grizzly had begun to stiffen, making his movements tight and painful. Still he pressed on, eyes fixed on Elias's back. The mountains had a different voice here. Wind sighed across ridges like distant chanting. A creek cut down through the rock in sharp, icy stitches. The sky was a pale white wash, cloud and air mingling. Mid-morning, one of the Delaware scouts halted abruptly and raised a hand. "Tracks," he whispered. Elias dismounted and knelt beside the snow. "Elk?" Carson guessed. "No," Elias murmured. "Men." The tracks were faint, snow-softened, but unmistakably human. 5 sets, heading the same direction, the rivals. Baptiste spat. "They know more than we think." "Maybe," Elias said, "but they don't know what to look for." He stood, scanning the horizon. "Keep moving. The land tells us more than any man." They came upon a double bluff of stone, rising like 2 worn teeth against the sky shapes Elias remembered from the hide, though time had eroded them. Snow drifted in the creases. The wind howled between them like an ancient judge's sigh. "There," Elias said. "First mark." Caleb squinted up at the towering bluffs. "Looks like a bishop's crown. Padre sign," Elias agreed. "Or the mountain's own language. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." They circled the first bluff, then the second, until the land funneled them into a narrow cleft. A natural stone arch stretched above, draped in long icicles. Carson stared. "That on the map too?" Elias nodded. Second mark. The air beneath the arch felt colder, heavier. Wind collected there in low moans, like voices carried through stone. "Third mark's close," Elias said. "Should be a wall or cave mouth with a spiral sign, Ute sign, meaning deep place. Sacred or dangerous?" Hardy muttered a prayer. The Delaware scouts had ridden ahead when one called back sharply. Elias dug his heels into his horse and galloped forward, the others not far behind. At the base of a sheer cliff, half hidden by brush and winter-cracked granite, was a symbol carved deep into the stone. A spiral, perfect, unmistakable. Circling inward toward a center that had been chipped out long ago, Caleb's breath caught. Elias. Elias ran his gloved fingers over the grooves. The wind dropped. The mountain seemed to hold still. "This is it," he said. Hardy squinted upward. "Where's the mine?" Elias pointed. Above them, 20 feet up the cliff face, behind a curtain of ice and wind-packed snow, lay a dark line, a horizontal shadow, an adit, larger than the one in the canyon, much larger. "Mother shaft," Elias whispered. "The big one." Carson swore softly. "We climb that?" "We do," Elias said, "because they will too." The cliff was not sheer, but it was slick with ice. They hacked footholds, used rope. Wind shoved them like a living thing. Caleb slipped twice, each time saved by a quick hand from Hardy or Carson. At last they reached the ledge. The mine mouth opened into blackness tall enough for 3 men to walk abreast, wide enough to swallow a wagon. The timbers bracing it were thicker, older, scarred by time. Snow had drifted inside, but the cold whistling air carried the unmistakable scent of deep stone. Elias stepped forward, holding the torch Hardy lit behind him. The flame flickered, casting trembling shadows across the entrance. Inside, the passage stretched into the mountain straight, reinforced, deliberate, Spanish work, Padre ambition. And something else Caleb could not name, something ancient, heavy and patient. A rock skittered down the cliff outside, boot steps crunched, harsh voices rose, men climbing, men close, men desperate. Caleb's heart lurched. "They found us." Elias didn't flinch. "They followed our tracks, same as we followed the priests," he said quietly. "Difference is, the priests feared God." He raised the torch higher. "And them men don't fear nothin'." Below, the rivals shouted, angry, breathless, climbing hard. Caleb drew his knife. Carson cocked his rifle. Elias stared into the mine's black throat. "Inside," he said. "We face 'em where the mountain favors us." They stepped into the dark. Behind them, the snow-laden wind blew the torch smoke back toward the ledge like a warning or a welcome. The mother shaft waited. The rivals climbed. And the mountains, ancient and cold, prepared to choose which men would walk back out into the world and which would stay buried with the Spanish dead. The mother shaft swallowed them whole. The air inside was cold enough to sting the sinuses, and the torchlight flickered in long gold veins along the walls. Spanish timbers, fat as a bull's torso and dark with age, lined the passage in rhythmic intervals, evidence of a mine meant to last, meant to be worked for generations. But no voices rang here now, no mule bells, no miners' shouts. Just the echo of their boots and the distant scrape of stone where the rivals climbed closer. Elias Carter moved at the front, torch held high, his face carved from equal parts determination and resignation. Caleb followed close behind, hand near his knife, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Carson and Baptiste flanked them. The Delaware scouts brought up the rear. The passage widened suddenly into a massive chamber large enough to fit 2 brigades of trappers. The ceiling soared like the inside of a cathedral. And in the center, half buried beneath rockfall and collapsed timber, lay the mine's heart, a Spanish ore cart, splintered, axle broken, gold ore still lay in it. Not glittering coins or nuggets, but quartz-heavy rock, streaked with yellow so deep it caught the torchlight in a dull, ancient glow. Caleb sucked in a breath. Carson murmured a soft oath. Baptiste crossed himself again. Elias said nothing. He walked to the ore cart slowly, like a man approaching a grave he'd dug for someone he loved. He picked up a chunk of ore the size of his fist, turned it over. The yellow streaks were thicker than anything a mountain man ever saw in these parts. "This was the mother vein," Elias said quietly. "Padres found it, worked it, maybe bled for it." He set the rock down and died for it. Caleb frowned. "How do you know they died here?" Elias pointed to the far wall. There, half hidden under tumbled stones, lay a skeleton no more than brittle bones wrapped in a tattered scrap of cloth. Around its neck hung a rosary, the cross broken clean in 2. The skull had a deep fracture at the temple, a cave-in. The priest, or miner, had been trapped. Beside him lay a second body, a mule's skeleton, ribs collapsed inward, iron bits of tack still clinging to its skull. It happened. "Fast," Elias said. Too fast for 'em to run. Shaft this big, once the beams go, whole mountain settles down on you. Carson swallowed. No survivors? None who wrote of it, Elias said. None who buried these men proper. Behind them the sound of climbing grew louder. Hardy turned. They're almost here. Elias stared at the bodies another moment, as if memorizing something only he could see. Then he said simply, "We end it. Now." They positioned themselves near the mouth of the chamber, just before the narrow passage leading back to daylight. Snow-filtered wind hissed faintly through the rocks. The torchlight threw wild shadows along the walls. The first of the rivals climbed through the entrance lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. He had time for one startled breath. Elias snuffed the torch. Darkness slammed down like an avalanche. Carson swung the butt of his rifle. Baptiste lunged with a knife. Caleb grabbed the lantern-bearer's wrist and twisted hard until the pistol clattered across the stone. The second rival forced his way inside, swinging wildly. The Delaware scout caught him from behind, a silent blur in the dark. The chamber filled with the rough noise of men fighting blind boots, slipping on gravel, harsh breathing, curses, the crack of bone on stone. In the confined dark, every sound grew monstrous. A gunshot rang out, deafening. Stone chips sprayed across Caleb's cheek. Carson shouted, "Get down!" Another shot, a grunt, a body falling. Then silence. Gradually, Elias struck flint to steel, relighting the torch. Carson knelt beside Hardy, who clutched his side, wounded but breathing. Two rivals lay still. The rest had fled, or lay half-broken somewhere in the dark of the passage. Elias didn't chase them. The mountain had taken its due. With Hardy lashed to a travois and the torch sputtering, they climbed out of the mother shaft into the bitter, late-afternoon air. Snow swirled around them, coating the waters and ledge. The wind howled across the ridge, blowing spindrift into their faces. Caleb looked back toward the mine mouth. "What do we do with it?" he asked. "We found it, just like the map said." Carson wiped blood from his knuckles. "We stake a claim? Bring others? Hell, this here could change fortunes from Taos to Street Louis." Baptiste shook his head, fear lingering in his eyes. "Gold bring only death." Caleb turned to Elias. "Well, you're the one who carried the map all these years. The mine's yours. What now?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He stood at the cliff edge, staring north where the land fell toward the desert and the sweet water beyond. His breath steamed. The sun dipped low, staining the snowy skyline red. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were softer than Caleb had ever seen. "Gold ain't why I came," Elias said. "Not really." Carson frowned. "Then why?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Because a dying man put this burden in my hand. Because he feared the wrong eyes would find it. Because some things ought to stay lost. The mountains take enough from men without us digging deeper." He reached into his coat, pulled out the map, the smoked hide that had guided him half a lifetime. Caleb stiffened. "Elias, what are you?" Elias tore it. Once, twice, 3 times. The pieces fluttered like dead leaves in the wind. "Elias!" Caleb shouted. Carson swore. Baptiste gasped. The Delaware scouts watched without emotion. They understood the weight of sacred places. Elias let the pieces fall, the wind scattering them across the ledge. "No man should chase this," he said quietly. "Not me, not them men, not the ones who'll come after. Mountains don't give gold. They trade for it, blood for ore. Always been that way." Caleb stared at him, stunned. "Then what will folks say of you? After all this?" Elias gave a tired smile. "Let 'em say what they will. I ain't a man built for legends." Carson chuckled softly. "Too late for that." Elias met Caleb's eyes. "Write it down proper. Tell the truth or tell the myth, I don't care. But leave the place itself to the dead." He turned his back on the mine. And in that moment, as snow drifted around him and the sun painted the ridge in gold he would never touch, Caleb understood. Some men hunted treasure, but some men, rare, strange, stubborn as the mountains became the treasure, men who could walk away from gold and choose life instead.